Good morning and welcome to the presentation of the magazine published by La Biennale di Venezia that has a new start 53 years after the last publication. We are live streaming from the library of the ASAC at the Central Pavilion of Giardini in Venice. I welcome our guests in the room and all those who are following us live, remotely, both from Italy and abroad. A warm welcome to the Minister of Culture, Alessandro Giuli, who is with us in this room. I am Cristiana Costanzo. I'm the head of the press office for visual art and architecture of La Biennale di Venezia. Our program today will have a first presentation by Debora Rossi, who is Vice General Manager of the Historic Archive of Contemporary Art, who is the editorial director of this magazine. We will have a greeting by the president of La Biennale di Venezia, Pietrangelo Buttafuoco, a lectio magistralis by architect Aziza Chaouni, who is one of the contributors of this magazine. And this presentation will be closed by a brief greeting by the Minister of Culture. The floor to Debora Rossi. Good morning and welcome. Welcome, Mr. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, authorities. Welcome in this library of La Biennale di Venezia, the library of the archive of La Biennale, the place where once our activities are completed, exhibitions and festivals, all contents are consolidated and become new subject of study and a source of inspiration. So this archive is not only a place where necessarily our assets are preserved, but also where we developed active design aiming to the future. And within the sphere of these activities by the archive, we have this project of this magazine. Since March 2024 of President Pietrangelo Buttafuoco, we started thinking of the opportunity, considering the development of the activities of the archive over the years, thinking of the opportunity to revive this magazine that started being published in the 1950s after the success of the first art exhibition in the after-war period in 1948. The project was launched in July 1950, and the first issue was published, and the publishing went on until 1961 with 58 issues of this magazine. You will see some images of the first issues. It is a quarterly magazine, an interdisciplinary magazine. It dealt with art, cinema, theater, music, and also fashion. There were not architecture nor dance, because in the first stages of La Biennale, they were part of the other sectors of La Biennale. They only became autonomous in the 1980s, architecture and dance, with the latest statutory reform of 1978. So the first issues aimed at promoting the activities of La Biennale that were described. You see contents and illustrations, images, starting from the 1960s, with Umbro Apollonio, the magazine became more critical in content, and we find important contributions by a young Umberto Eco, who wrote about art and experimentation, or a small article observatory dedicated to young emerging directors and artists, Celand, Bertolucci. An extraordinary experience. And it was focused on research. Research is in the DNA of this institution, not only mentioned and described in the statute of La Biennale, but it is the very source for the activities of our sectors, of our departments. A research that also means experimentation, looking at the present so that we can imagine the future. So it was high time for us to revive this magazine with a multidisciplinary approach, describing the different activities of La Biennale di Venezia, also including fashion, because also fashion in its creative process, which aims at experimenting and making research, is perfectly in line with the artistic design activity. And then the idea was having a paper issue of this magazine, because it will be a quarterly magazine published on paper, to transform it into the object of studies, but also to give a sense of the quality, of the preciousness of the contents of this magazine. We have a graphic structure that is quite peculiar, extremely innovative, and I would like to thank from the very start the Studio Tomo Tomo, our graphic experts, Davide Di Gennaro and Luca Pictoni, who collaborated with us in defining this new product. As I've already told you, it will be published quarterly, and we have decided to have a multilingual version, leaving the contributions in their original language, mainly English and Italian. But should there be different languages that we believe can have a particular additional content in their original version, they will be published in the original version with a translation at the end of the magazine for the different texts. The magazine is also enriched by an iconographic layout that is made up with the images of the historic archive taken from the photograph archive of the historic archive, coming from all disciplines, cinema, visual arts. We have selected these images for their content, but also for their capacity not only to represent the history of La Biennale, but also for their reference and their being connected with the lively themes we face today. And there is also a photographic research in the national and international archives of the production of important photographers who many of whom are present here today with us. Each issue of the magazine has a monographic approach, is based on one specific theme, a subject that is chosen time by time by the work of the editorial staff, the internal staff, I want to thank, but also comprising the whole working group of La Biennale, because the activity of La Biennale is the result of a daily discussion, of a daily collection of suggestions, images, experiences that turn out to be useful for the development of the institution. And also in the choice of these themes, we tend to adopt this collective decision-making process. The contents mainly consist in ex cathedra contributions, dialogues, articles. They are totally free, because we do not want to have a structure that is too rigid and defined. Instead, we turn to the personalities that cross the activities of La Biennale in all its sectors because of their professional experience. Our artistic directors and the artists who have taken part in the activities of the different sectors, but also researchers, historians, scientists who dialectically reflect on the contents of the activities of La Biennale. The first issue is dedicated to water. We see the cover of the magazine. It deals with water, and the title is DILUVI PROSSIMI VENTURI, the coming floods. I will briefly list the contributions, although I invite you to have a look at the magazine and read the articles in depth, in alphabetical order. In the magazine, in the different sections, we have Manal Aldovayan, who closes this issue, an artist who, with his work, makes us think of the rights of the Persian Gulf women to have a beneficial activity by the sea, an actor and a diver from Turkey who tells us about his relationship with water. Professor Barbante, with his memory of the ice and the archive of the glaciers, who tells us a lot about the different eras and the different evolution of climate. Caroline Carson, our former director of the dance sector of La Biennale, who tells us about the relationship of water and its influence on her creative process. Architect Chaouni, whom we listened to in our lectio magistralis, and she faces the problems and the way in which the problems are faced in countries where drought and aridity is a serious problem. A conversation between Giovanni Lindo Ferretti and Maria Grazia Pontorno, a walk on the hills of Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, her relationship with nature, water, the mountain, and the mountain architect Foscari, who tells us about the opportunity of having water reserves, water reservoirs, water reserves in the Antarctic area. Emanuele Rosa, telling us about the strange process to collect humidity in the desert and thus creating water reserves. John Kisella, a poet, talking with Davide Bruno, Alessandro Parravicini, and Elena Vittirelli. Francesco Palmieri, who tells us about water and the relationship of a city like Naples with water. Gita Palusci, who tells us about the Sabir, the language used in the Mediterranean basin, the language of water spoken all over the Mediterranean as a common language. And then at the center of the magazine, a contribution ex cathedra by a Nobel Award of Literature, Pamuk, who has given us this interview with Stelio Solina. He tells us about the relationship between Istanbul and Venice and the roots in our daily life in front of water. Professor Andrea Rinaldo, Nobel Award for Research on Water, who tells us about the Venice of the future, the possible Venice of the future, a contribution by Cardinal de Mendoza, who is the prefect of the Ministry of Culture and Education for the Holy Seat, who tells us about thirst in the world and thirst of our souls. And then the maps by Lorenzo Tosio, telling us about the navigation routes in the Mediterranean, but also a study on waters, and then a contribution by Luciano Violante, a very poetic piece on an old verb in the Italian language, ad acquare, with suggestions about water. Peter Veer, the director, the Golden Lion Award for a Lifetime Achievement of La Biennale di Venezia, who tells us about his experience when shooting Master and Commander, one of his masterpieces. And Kong Jian-yu, an engineer, a Chinese engineer, who tells us about this Chinese project about the sponge cities in China. You see here the cover? It is an image that brings us back to Yuri Ankarani and his Atlantide that was presented at the film festival in Venice in the Orizzonti section. And as I was saying before, besides archive images in this magazine, you also find pictures by Chiara Arturo, Alessandro Cinque, Antonio Martinelli, Paolo Pellegrini, Italo Rondinella, Paolo Verzone, Federico Vespignali, and Francesco Zizzola. I must say that it is really moving for me to see this work finally being realized. Again, allow me to thank our president, Pietrangelo Buttafuoco, for launching this idea and for having allowed us to develop this project together. Allow me to thank Andrea Del Mercato, General Manager of La Biennale di Venezia, who has supported us. And just a few more words to share this emotion with the editorial staff of the magazine, an in-house staff, starting from the press offices. We have heard Cristiana Costanzo, the Press Office for Art and Architecture, Manuela Caldirolo for Dance, Music and Theatre, and then the younger colleagues Cesare Pesantis and Claudia Gioia, and Claudio Lughi, Institutional Press Office of La Biennale, who's also the chief editor of the magazine, and then our colleagues in the archive, Cazzaro, Campagnolo, Durante, Bottaro, Giovanna Bottaro, who is coordinating the secretariat, the editorial secretariat, and Flavia Fossa Margutti, art director of this magazine, Maria Grazia Pontorno, who completes our staff. So allow me to thank all of them, but also to the whole working group of La Biennale, because as I told you before, it is a common effort we are making. Last but not least, allow me to mention a further professional contribution. As in the artistic sectors of La Biennale, the staff, the working group, is activated by new energies, launching projects based on their ideas, the artistic directors. In this case, we really needed an external contribution, a professional contribution from the outside. We are not journalists. This is a new job for us. So we had the honor of having a journalist, a master like Luigi Mascheroni, helping us and accepting to serve as a director for this magazine. Thank you all. And please read the magazine and enjoy it.
Grazie, Debora Rossi.
Thank you, Debora Rossi. We have now our president, Pietrangelo Buttafuoco, whom I invite here to the table. Enjoy the reading, first of all, but even before, You have to buy the magazine. You can buy the magazine. I would like to remember that Fondazione La Biennale di Venezia is an institution, a public institution, and it provides a public service. I was already committed to fighting a battle for the film festival against free tickets, subtracting what should be duly given to the purse of La Biennale, a civic duty to support the artistic cultural effort, and I'm saying cultural work in reality, because this is time we devote to thinking, to studying. We make efforts in trying to develop projects and to develop our future. I want to stress this because I'm sure that all of you, my friends, you have a clear idea about the duty of a public institution, providing a public service. Welcome to all of you. Thank you, all of you. I'm not adding anything else to what Debora has just said. Allow me just to say thank you, Minister. The joy, the daily joy we feel working in an institution from which I can learn something every day. Dear Luigi Mascheroni, dear director, we know how important it is to have this very sense of paper, a precious and precise material, as when we have to preserve a work of art, as we have to preserve the sense of designing, when we have to preserve everything that is around us, which is part of our political responsibility on the future, on the beauty we have around us, that has to remain. So it was very useful to listen to our general manager, Andrea Del Mercato, who suggested to proceed step by step in order to build something that will remain and that will be something looked for. Everybody will try to get a copy of this magazine with its contents. I will stop here. I know that the words have a precise meaning. We will listen to a lectio magistralis of a person who has the name of Aziza. Aziza is a peculiar root. There is a peculiar root in this name, Aziz, which identifies beauty, excellence, the best, the splendor. The most beautiful building in my home country is the Aziza, the building my ancestors decided to build so that people coming from all over the world could feel part of that beauty. And the Aziza today is here in the words, in the text, in the authority, in the science and knowledge of the person who will tell us today about a specific feeling, the privilege we have in being able to listen to her, the privilege of learning something from her, the privilege of possessing with this first issue of the magazine, 53 years later, of possessing the sense of a public institution that is providing a public service. Minister, have a good job. And the floor to our Professor Chaouni. President, I join you in what you and Debora Rossi in thanking you for starting this adventure. Yesterday night we were remembering the weekly meetings we have had to organize that are strengthening our relationship and the friendship we have. So thank you, President, for giving us the possibility of starting this adventure. I can still remember the first meeting you summoned when you asked us to if we were prepared to start this new project. So we thank you, really, from the deep of our heart. It is now time for our lectio magistralis by Aziza Chaouni. She's an architect from Morocco. She has her office in Toronto and Fez. She's a professor of architecture at the University of Toronto. She took part in the Architecta Biennale 2023 in the Guest from the Future section curated by Leslie Locco. Chaouni is specialized in the design of sustainable technologies for dry climate. She has a contribution in our magazine, Designing for an Arid Future. Aziza, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you hear me, everyone? Buongiorno, grazie mille per avermi invitato. I'm sorry about my accent. So good morning, everyone. I'm extremely excited and honored to be with you today in this beautiful space and to share some thoughts on a natural resource that we cannot live or dwell without, water. So, as architects, we are taught in school that water is a resource brought into and out of a building through a dedicated infrastructure, something we have no role in shaping and must accept as a given. We're also warned to watch out for water entering our designs, being encouraged to treat it as an enemy to defeat and keep out at all costs. In the past decade, in the advent of a more ecological approach to design and a growing awareness of climate change challenges, with water stress affecting more and more cities and regions globally, the field of architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design have somewhat shifted to address the extremes of water availability, its scarcity on one hand, or its destructive abundance. I would argue that while these design disciplines have indeed become more aware today, both in practice and pedagogy, and while governments are beginning to acknowledge and promote sustainable freshwater use, we still have a long way to go. As designers, we need to treat water and its infrastructural systems as entities such as vital as structural or as materials, entities that should be addressed throughout the design process as precious resources. Why is this important, you might ask? Why can this be left to engineers to handle? It is because we have entered a critical global era characterized by increasing urban populations, rising temperatures, prolonged droughts, floods, wildfires, and the depletion of freshwater resources. This requires an urgent paradigm shift towards what I call a water-intelligent city. We should not only change how we approach designing our cities, buildings, and landscapes, but we should also rethink our centralized water infrastructural system that's inherited from the 18th century. This system is not only aging, derelict, and overcapacity, but it was also conceived on the premise that natural resources like water are infinite, something that will flow endlessly at the turn of a tap. I hope we all agree in this room that this ongoing attitude is irresponsible, to say the least, and an alternative is direly needed. I believe we must break down the walls between design, technical and social sciences, and even AI, and integrate water infrastructure with the built environment as a single system, with all components supporting and reinforcing one another, from the scale of urban furniture all the way to the one of the city and its street networks. Let me explain further. Typically, cities are designed first, and then a centralized water system is connected to its different urban components. And this traditional water infrastructure consumes a lot of energy to collect fresh water, treat it, distribute it through pipes, and then move back wastewater and water runoff through sewage to a centralized treatment plant outside the city usually, in the best case scenario, because there are instances where this wastewater is simply discarded in nature. While centralization has many advantages, such as efficiency and also quality control, it lacks seriously resilience and wastes a lot of energy to move water back and forth and also to treat it. I would like to propose a hybrid model that promotes the simultaneous design of the city and its water systems, one supporting the other. It's going to be much more efficient. And this model would maximize, for example, rainwater capture, water recycling, and water reuse. All these things would happen at the same time. This suggested relationship could be described as symbiotic mutualism, a phenomenon in which two or more organisms live or function together to benefit each other, like the one that connects, for instance, the shark and the remora, or the rhino and the tick bird. It is encouraging and inspiring to see that many of these ideas are already being implemented in best practice design projects across the globe, such as this sponge-like park in Bangkok by the Firmland process, which can absorb up to 1 million gallons of water. In my own experience, arid contexts in the Global South, where most of my work and research take place, offer a rich opportunity to investigate further new approaches where architecture, landscape, city, and water are intimately intertwined from the very start. Allow me to backtrack a bit and share with you what might have spurred my interest in this topic. My first memorable encounter with an architecture that integrates water into its language dates back to my childhood. Growing up in Fez, Morocco, I often accompanied my late grandmother, Saida, that you can see here, to the thermal bath in Sidi Harazem, where we swam together, drank the hot spring water, and where my grandmother prayed for relief from her painful rheumatisms. Here are some old photos of a few of our visits with my cousins and my grandmother, and you can see in the background of the photo where I'm sitting on a stuffed camel, the oasis of Sidi Harazem. So the thermal complex was designed in the 1960s by Moroccan-Corsican architect Jean-François Zevaco in an oasis 10 kilometers outside of my hometown of Fez, near a hot spring that has been for centuries, since the Roman time, actually, a popular leisure, health, and spiritual destination that attracted Moroccans from all over the country. And I recall my initial reaction. I feared the imposing behemoth structure, and also liked it very much, since it was unlike anything I had encountered before. Water murmured in my ears everywhere I went, and I quickly became enthralled. Zevaco thermal bath existed beyond my wildest dreams. It was a palm tree oasis of trees and concrete. It was an amazing city, magical city in my child's eyes, that emerged abruptly from a landscape of cascading hills and streams. This city was a tapestry filled with delicate filigree canopies, pools, drinking fountains, blue mosaic-covered basins, and constructed waterfalls. And it has also labyrinthine pathways covered with pergolas and bougainvillea, floating staircases suspended by thin cables, and a covered market covered with concrete pyramids, and a building as large as a cargo ship raised on V-shaped columns that you can see here. So it was a child's paradise, a captivating adventureland that stood in stark contrast to the typical urban environment I was accustomed to, one where nature was tame and water confined to formal fountains. Zevaco Thermal Bath Complex not only represented new ways of building and creating public spaces, but also offered the reinterpretation of Moroccan vernacular architecture by weaving water, gardens, courtyards, and building together in unexpected ways. It is likely the seeds of my interest in architecture it was actually planted there. Those seeds were planted during my visits to the thermal bath with my grandmother. After beginning my architectural education in 2000, I came to understand that this station heroic architecture fell within the Brutalis corpus, which Simon Phipps poetically described as an architecture of sensorial extremes, offering an extraordinary and unfamiliar experience to the visitor. My nostalgia was tainted, however, by the station's decline, which you can see in this video, its partial shutdown, abandoned architecture, public spaces, and water features, and the drastic decrease in the hot water spring, and its also surrounding hills that were becoming more and more yellow, since they were hit by years of continuous droughts. Still, its aura remained unscattered. The station's architecture shone brightly despite the additions of new buildings, the gradual emergence of informal markets, the invasion of moss, rust, and nature, and its sunburned arid hills that were desperately lacking water. The lessons of Zevaco's poetic integration of architecture and water, like the stream covered with zellige, which are the Moroccan tiles embedded in all public staircases, coupled with the negative consequences of dwindling precipitation, have stayed with me and led me to embark on the rehabilitation of this complex, which I will touch upon later in my talk. In 2007, a postgraduate year-long research trip to the Sahara Desert, supported by the Harvard Appleton Fellowship, which I actually recently described in the October issue of the Architecture Review that was dedicated to desert, further deepened my interest in the relationship between water and the built environment. During this trip, I researched ecotourism architecture in the Sahara, which attempted to reimagine vernacular models to suit today's contemporary needs while respecting the environment and integrating also the benefits of the local communities. I experienced firsthand then the relative nature of scarcity. What seems scarce to us is not scarce to nomadic tribes who can thrive with very little water and live in very simple mobile shelters. I discovered methods used to address the expanding scarcity that I saw unfolding before my eyes. Methods drawn from both traditional techniques like water catchment through the old Katara system that you can see here, and also the ingenious modern solutions like the subterranean water treatment wetlands of Adrer of Amelal in Siwa in Egypt. And I consider this trip to be my defining grand tour, the quintessential experience that shaped the architect, educator, and researcher I would become. What fascinated me most about arid contexts is the stimulating opportunities they provide, encouraging new ways of thinking, designing, collaborating, forming solidarities, and engaging with stakeholders. These environments invited the crafting of novel models for sustainable architectural practices, ones in which water plays a central role. Such scarce contexts also prompt us to critically reevaluate the paradigm of abundance and endless growth embedded in our capitalist economies, paradigms that are deeply rooted in dominant beliefs about nature's scarcity, which is viewed as a finite resource that can be perpetually substituted and replaced when depleted. This very conceptualization of scarcity sits at the heart of the current planetary crisis. The full potential of working in and investigating scarce contexts is unlocked when we challenge the traditional conceptualization of scarcity, which typically focuses on tangible shortages defined as situations where demand continuously outstrips supply, leading to progressively dwindling reserves. Instead, we should consider resources not as isolated commodities heading towards inevitable exhaustions, but as part of a complex social, economic, political, and environmental ecosystem. Professor of Architecture Jeremy Till aptly reminds us that the creative challenge for our profession today is not merely to reorganize our limited resources, but to design new processes that redirect and optimize these flows, altering our value systems and behaviors. This approach involves understanding resources within their larger context and expanding our agency as architects to reconfigure them. More than a decade ago, architect and professor Pier Vittorio Aureli's book, Less is Enough, had a significant influence on me. I was attuned to his advocacy for radical asceticism, which he applies to architecture and its modes of production. I couldn't help but relate Aurelius' monastic priest to the desert nomads I work with in the Sahara, whose definition and implementation of less are so intimately connected to their natural environment that it goes beyond what most of us can comprehend. The question remains, how much less is enough for each context? How do we change users' values in this regard? And most importantly, how do we achieve this by learning from past vernacular lessons without falling into nostalgia, while integrating promising modern and future techniques and technologies? This approach applies to water systems just as it does to materials, construction techniques, structures, and other building components. Let me now demonstrate this new approach to water infrastructure through some modest examples of mine set in arid context and that emerged from my academic research and my practice Aziza Chaouni projects based in Fez, Morocco. The project that most helped me articulate a new approach to water systems in arid region was my research project Out of Water, Design Solutions for Arid Climates, co-led by my colleague at Daniels, landscape architect and associate professor Liat Margolis. Both born and raised in arid countries, Morocco and Israel, we sought to develop a toolkit for designers to address water scarcity in their projects. Based on 5 years of research, a traveling exhibition, and feedback from an international conference at the University of Toronto, the results of the out-of-water projects are presented through case studies and essays by international experts, along with analytical drawings of both projected and existing solutions. You can see our drawing here on this slide of the Wadi Hanifa sewage treatment plant, and that's located in Riyadh, designed by Moriyama and Teshima, which actually uses all of the wastewater of the city in a beautiful urban park. We developed an analytical matrix by which we assessed each project water performance and energy consumption. Some of our key conclusions for addressing water scarcity in design disciplines were: 1, the use of different water qualities for different usages; 2, the integration of ancestral knowledge and technologies from other fields, such as agriculture, into design; 3rd, the necessity of completely rethinking our centralized water systems and their outdated single-pipe plumbing approach, and reimagining landscapes and buildings to capture themselves, store, treat, and distribute water to ensure that every single drop counts. The traveling exhibition showcased the case studies we analyzed, as well as speculative futures for arid cities, which we invited colleagues to reimagine. The traveling exhibition showcased and illustrated on this slide. There are 2 examples. For example, the Underground City by Matsis, and a Dunesque, if I might say, a bodysuit that recycles urine and sweat into drinking water by Jimenez Lai. The exhibition could be viewed and read while sitting on reclaimed toilets, which we, of course, cleaned ahead of time. So by allowing me to study a diverse set of designs, economic development models, and agricultural and engineering projects in arid regions from around the globe, the Out of Water project enabled me to firmly establish new standards of action as both as an educator, as an architect. Standards where every single drop of water counts, and where the broader water cycle is always reconsidered, and where new infrastructural systems are crafted when needed. In my architecture practice, the most significant application of this method are the Fez River project, the Judur Sahara Music School, which both won the Holcim Award for Sustainable Construction in the regional and global categories, and of course the thermal spring of Sidi Harazem and its rehabilitation. The Fez River project involved the depollution and covering of the river that crosses my hometown, the UNESCO World Heritage City of Fez, which had become, at the time, an open-air sewer, unfortunately. Due to time constraints, I won't delve into this project today, but there are several publications and also a TED Talk that talks about it. And instead, I'm going to focus on the Judur Sahara and the Sidi Harazem, that are 2 projects very dear to my heart. So Judur Sahara began as an NGO I founded in 2016 with other foreign and local partners to offer free music, dance, and environmental awareness classes to approximately 1,200 children and youth living in the oasis of Mohammed El Ghizlan, located at the very end of the UNESCO biosphere, the Oasis Valley of the Dra in Morocco. Mohammed is severely affected by drought and climate change, and its cultural, architectural, and agricultural heritage is literally being swallowed by advancing sand dunes. This exceptional culture is a blend of Berber, Hassani, and Sub-Saharan traditions. And it actually gave rise to 8 different types of dance and music in the oasis, which is composed of 8 small villages that you can see on this map. And a perfect illustration of what I call slow architecture, this project proves Cedric Price right. The solution was not a space at first, was not to make architecture. Instead, the school's curriculum, training, and instruments, along with the collection and translation of traditional songs and dances that are very unique to Morocco, were compiled on a research website, drudursahara.org. Then part of the cafe of Halim Sbai, one of the school co-founders, was used to host classes and shows. So you can actually see the school here, the first school iteration, which was the cafe, and where also my son, Hedi, who's present here at this lecture, stands with the students. And over a decade, so a very slow time, we tested various anti-desertification control techniques with the NGO Sahara roots. And we use, for example, the water box system and tamarisk trees, whose roots stabilize the soil, and palm tree matrices as well. This system has proven successful, achieving a 75% survival rate for tamarisk trees after 3 years compared to the usual 30% that survive using drip irrigation. So this system has been also approved and for dissemination by the ONZOA, which is Morocco's oasis branch at the Ministry of Forestry. And our ambition is to carefully assess this experiment in an academic setting with the goal of improving and spreading it over African countries in the Sahara. And you can see here as well that we further experimented and we added onto the original system rammed earth walls as well as a larger matrix of woven palm tree leaves. So you can see the water box system here being placed by our team and also the students from the school. And then 2 years later, this is what it looked like. You can also see my son Hedi with his friend Omaima that are tending to fixing the water pipes. And when it came time to expand the school due to its growing success, we proposed a new campus at the edge of the oasis so that its architecture could also serve as a barrier against advancing sand dunes. And a thorough analysis of locally available materials and skills helped us select a palette of rammed earth brick, stone, lime, cedar wood, and reeds, all sourced within a 20 kilometers radius without using a single ounce of concrete. And I'm very proud about that. The school's water network relies on recycling and is quasi-autonomous. Seasonal water from the river fills its water reservoir in addition to rainwater. Furthermore, following some of the findings of the out-of-water research, we aim to rethink how buildings in a Saharan climate could forge a new relationship with water. For example, the space above a water reservoir acts as a naturally cooled classroom, and also an auditorium serves as a water collector connected to the water reservoir. A urine separating compost toilets provide irrigation for non-edible trees like the tamarisk trees and also provide compost for our gardens. So you can see here the auditorium, which is still going to be finished within a month, that also helps gather rainwater that then is being led to the underground water reservoir. Some more photos of the reservoir / auditorium. And we all invite you to come to the opening of the first buildings of the school at the Zaman Festival of Saharan Music, its 3rd edition, at the end of the month of November. And I'd like to end with the project that started it all, and which I mentioned earlier in my talk, the Sidi Harazm Thermal Bath Complex, built between 1960 and 75 by Jean-François Zévaco at the dawn of Morocco's independence. And it was Morocco's first post-independence leisure resort designed for Moroccans in a famed oasis known for its hot spring and its Sufi saint mausoleum. Years of neglect and dubious attempts to Moroccanize the complex, which you can see here, led to the Moroccan State Pension Fund, which commissioned it and still owns the complex, to attempt to sell it to a Chinese developer for courses to demolish it. Horrified by the news, I approached them in 2017 to jointly apply for the Getty Keeping It Modern grant. My constant advocacy, and at times I have to admit begging, to preserve the complex, along with the ludicrous cost of dynamiting such a well-built large-scale concrete structure, led them, thank God, to change course and to give rehabilitation a change. We were lucky to receive the Getty grant at the end in collaboration with the owner and also an international team of experts. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, the brutalist masterpiece of Zevaco was conceived as a matrix interwoven with the landscape and with a series of water features, including ponds, pools, canals, cascade, which departed from the oasis on the north and used gravity to travel the entire site. The whole complex is organized around a central courtyard, which Zevaco called the Riyadh, which means interior courtyard in Arabic, clearly referencing the patios of the traditional houses in the nearby Medina of Fez and their cooling water features. Zevaco integrates the water from the hot spring everywhere in the complex, like in this stair where the excess water from the main water fountain is led down a narrow channel covered with blue mosaics, typical of the nearby city of Fez. I was most amazed also to discover on my way to Sidi Harazem one day, these pits called the sebkas, and which are used by locals to gather rainwater for their herds. And I immediately made the connection with Zevaco's spring water circular pool, which appears to the visitor like a blue mirage amid an arid landscape. The complex owner's archives, which sadly were located in a basement, were flooded in the 90s, and Zevaco's own archive was dispersed after his passing. So we embarked on a quest across 3 continents to find the original architecture drawings of Zevaco's complex. Some drawings and photos were found, like those you can see here of the stairs towards the pool with Zevaco's daughter. But we also had to travel in France, Morocco, and Canada, and it was truly an Indiana Jones-worthy saga to find the remaining drawings. However, we're still missing a lot of information on certain buildings, original furniture, finishes, technical drawings, including those of the water system. So what we did to counter this scarcity of information is we launched a major social media campaign called Sidi Harazem, Je me souviens, Sidi Harazem, I remember, for which we produced 20-second capsule videos and asked people to contribute any materials or memories they have. We were very surprised that this campaign gathered a flood of photos, postcards, testimonies, and some ancestors of the selfie, and more, and they all helped us to understand Zevaco's original design and also the original water system. We used drawings as a tool to document and study all the buildings and outdoor spaces, like the beautiful stair leading to the circular pool, which are intertwined with planters, water channels, etc. You can also see here the drawings of the beautiful water buffet, which is a stunning vertical fountain that Zevaco designed, and the drawings also of the Riyadh with its intricate water system, which uses solely gravity to move water from north to south and create a delightful promenade. But most importantly to me, we were able for the first time to complete the drawing of the entire water system, which you can see here. So you can notice that water from the circular pool used to be released at the end of each day to form a laguna, which was then connected downstream to the river. Zevaco water system for the complex is not closed loop, which means that when the water actually finishes on the south, it is discarded in the nearby stream. Also, I should mention that none of the beautiful features that I showed you are functional today, but not because of water shortage, but because their inlet is shut off because there is no one to maintain it. Hence, the Sidi Harazem complex is now as dry as its surrounding landscape, and only its pool and drinking fountain still receive water from the spring. So in parallel to this documentation process, we launched a series of consultations with all stakeholders, especially those who used to live near the oasis and had been displaced for the creation of the modern complex, who was designed in a true modernist fashion after tabula rasa. And they all felt very unfulfilled by the promise of the project. So using various games designed specifically for different user groups, we developed a master plan that included new and rehabilitated buildings to bring people to the site year-round while preserving the natural environment. So you can see here some of the results that were visualized and summarized. And the final vision for the project imagined the site as a center for well-being, culinary experiences, and modern heritage education, ensuring that the site is visited for the whole year and has a synergy with the UNESCO World Heritage City of Fez, which is considered the culinary capital of Morocco. We then returned to the drawing board to include new necessary buildings shown in green on the plan, such as a spa, a library auditorium, a new market, as well as restoration plans for Zevaco Modern Complex. To address the declining spring water levels that fed Zevaco's extensive waterworks, the entire water system of the complex was reconfigured into a closed-loop system that filters and reuses the spring water. In addition, the irrigation of the garden is using now recycled gray water. The overall master plan was built upon a thorough conservation management plan called CMP, which serves as a blueprint for all rehabilitation across at different scales. So, for example, the CMP listed the two mountainsides framing Sidi Harazem and the river as areas of high significance to be protected, left natural with no buildings. Similarly, the CMP assigns different levels of significance to buildings and public spaces, and of course, all water featured were listed of high significance and should be restored in priority during the phase one of the project. Why is this important in a Global South context? Is because they're very limited budget, so we had to set up a list of what should be preserved first. And we did exactly the same thing for all of the building. We applied the same approach. So to kick off the rehabilitation project, we provided these temporary shelters, which you can see here, where we moved the population that was occupying informally parts of the complex. And sadly, after COVID, the rehabilitation stopped, so we turned to cultural activation by organizing artist residencies and musical events, all of this as volunteers, to keep the site dynamic and to demonstrate that minimal intervention can still host events and programs. So you can see here some of the concerts we hosted. And so COVID actually stopped the rehabilitation, but by a very odd turns of event, thanks to Morocco's co-hosting the World Cup, thank you soccer, the project is getting back on track because the country needs more hotel rooms and the complex has 180 of them that are in need of restoration. And at last, we're also preparing a publication, Sidi Harazem, a Modern Oasis, that's going to be out in 2025, and that follows a Getty publication that was edited and free for you to access modern heritage under pressure. So to conclude, I hope that my lecture conveyed two key points. First, the necessity and urgency of rethinking our cities' water systems, and second, the potential for learning from arid contexts in the Global South, where extreme water stress and myriad constraints demand experimental design solutions. With 17 countries, from India to Spain and Botswana, experiencing intense water stress and several megacities with over 10 million inhabitants already facing severe water shortage, including Sao Paulo in Brazil, Chennai in India, and Cape Town in South Africa, imagining water-smart cities must be one of our top priorities. So as a colleague, Dr. Cole once said, we do not need great leaders of broken systems, we need crafters of new ones. Thank you very much.
Grazie Aziza, quanta strada.
Thank you, Aziza. What a long journey from out of water. What a long journey from out of water, 10 years this year. It was the inspiration for you to collaborate to this first issue that has water as a theme. I would now invite the Minister of Culture, Alessandro Giuli, to join us here to the podium for his contribution. Thank you. I'm really enchanted by this lecture. And I would like to stress what President Buttafuoco has said before, the importance of learning in the places where you make culture and make a culture a public function. And now my formal greetings. Allow me to greet all of you, dear friends of La Biennale, all those present, Mr. President Pietrangelo, who is part of my heart, Debora Rossi, the General Manager Andrea Del Mercato, and Aziza Chaouni, who has given us an extremely interesting lecture that concluded with a reference to desertification and the problem of water. The health for aqua, salus per aquam. And there is a great problem we are experiencing in these days. If you take a magazine in your hands, the first thing you should do is looking at the aesthetic beauty, smell it, and remember that water is contained in this magazine. It wouldn't exist without water. The human body and everything that is creativity comes from the amniotic liquid. And this is the amniotic liquid of a great story that restarts after 5 decades. As the human body starts in the amniotic liquid and is nourished by water, we are like a container of water that tend to dehydrate over time. And the civilizations that are not aware of themselves become morally, culturally, and civically dehydrated. La Biennale is a demonstration of how you can rehydrate yourself through culture, how you can disseminate culture and scientific knowledge through activities like fashion, architecture, art, by rediscovering an archive that is unique in the world, made in water that has been transformed into paper, passing through the trees. Had we not trees, we wouldn't have what is today the artifact of an extraordinary aesthetic quality. And therefore, I can only rejoice, be happy about the enthusiasm I feel for being here back in Venice. Venice that is the embodiment of the relationship between civilization and water. I have recently written that water is the soul of Venice, containing its body. So there is no better place for a new start, for a new beginning, for an act of love for a bet that has to be paid and funded adequately, then this place, this center of dissemination of culture, civilization, and love, a minister of culture like me comes here, thinks of what he represents in Italy with the different institutions, science, knowledge, and creativity, and finds in Venice a reality that is so high, so much beyond the polemics we experience every day. A great example of what can be done after the flood, Luciano Violante mentions in his thoughts in the magazine. We must always remember that we are sons of earthquakes, but we are also sons and daughters of water. We are aborigines because we have transformed the environment. Water is what gives us life. It has forced us to travel and to think of ourselves and represent ourselves. And this is all I have to say, except that when you are here, you realize that Italy is just a Venice in miniature.
Grazie, signor Ministro.
Thank you, Minister, for your participation and for your warm speech. Before closing this presentation, allow me to mention that the magazine is on sale at the bookshop of I Giardini in the Arsenal, in Ca' Giustiniana, in the store of La Biennale, in the main bookshops. And starting from the 5th of November, the magazine will be presented in different places in Italy and abroad at different institutions, in book fairs and cultural fairs. The next event will be on the 5th of November in Padua, Palazzo Zabarella, and then a tour of presentations will start also abroad, in China in particular. Allow me to thank you all on behalf of La Biennale di Venezia. Thank you for following us, and see you soon, and enjoy the reading of the magazine as our president suggested.